Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Lisa Quaites. Looking forward to our conversation, Lisa.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
The honour's all mine. Yeah. So Lisa also goes as Lee, and we connected a couple of months ago, and it's been a busy summer for Lisa. You told me that you've had the arrival of the grandson. So
Yes, I have
just
my first grandson. He was born a couple months ago, and it's super exciting. He's
yeah,
so precious, precious gift for sure.
precious gift. So when we spoke last, you talked about the fact that earlier in your life you weren't connected with a lot of people in the adoptee community, and when you did connect with them, there were some you had some eye-opening insights, right? I was wondering if you could share some of those with us, please.
Yes, I was raised in a African American family with absolutely no exposure to Korean culture. So my heritage is I'm half Black, I'm half Korean. Actually, I'm half Caribbean and half Korean. And I was raised in the United States with no exposure to either my Caribbean culture or my Korean culture, which was completely fine. And I didn't have any other exposure or interaction with any other adoptees either. So I grew up just without, I guess, really focusing on the fact that I was adopted or focusing on the fact that I was Korean. At the time, I didn't know I was half Caribbean as well. And so maybe I didn't experience trauma early on with that regard. But in my later years, as I became an adult, and this is like 2018 is when I met my first adult Korean adoptee. And she introduced me to an online community that I had no idea was even there. And that's when I really became involved with the Korean adoptee community and just really realized some of the struggles and the challenges that they have had to face their whole entire lives with being separated from the Korean culture, being the only Asian in the communities where they were raised. And it was very eye-opening. I had no idea.
Yeah. And how did their experiences kind of map to your own experiences, would you say?
I felt like we had similar experiences in that if they grew up in predominantly white communities with white families, they felt like they were white, even though they were Asian. I had that same identity at crisis. I was raised, I'm half Black, half Korean. So I do not look straight up Asian. And I grew up in Black culture. And I grew up thinking I was this little Black girl, and I couldn't understand when kids teased me and called me China girl. Because when I look in the mirror, see a little Black girl looking back, and they look at me and they see an Asian, and I'm like, well, I'm Black just like you. And no, I wasn't in their eyes. And so that was a bit difficult. So I understand that, they grew up in white communities, they thought they were white. I grew up in a Black community, I thought I was Black. So
Yeah,
kind of parallel there.
yeah, indeed, indeed. You you mentioned last time we spoke about fear as a safety net, and uh, I, that struck me for some particular. I've never heard it expressed like that. So, could you tell us a little bit more about what that meant? Fear as a
Yeah.
safety net.
So I think sometimes we kind of let fear control our lives. And and sometimes that's a good thing because fear will keep you from doing things that aren't necessarily in your best interest. But other times I feel like, we don't actually achieve the healing that we need because we allow our lives to totally be governed by fear. You know, we're going to do certain things or interact in certain ways because of the fear of maybe I'm going to be abandoned again by those people who are close to me, and I don't want that to happen again. I don't want to lose that connection. And so I think some of our decisions are kind of based around that, and I feel like that sometimes can impede the healing process.
Yeah. And was there a point where you realized, can you remember a point where you had the realization that fear was controlling you in some instances?
I think, I don't know if I have one specific example. I do know that before I went to Korea in 2019 to search for my mom, prior to that, I had never really ever considered going back to Korea. It just was never on my radar. It's literally halfway on the other side of the world for me. And it just was not ever something that I considered. And I think if I would have allowed fear to control my actions, I probably never would have made that trip in 2019. And so I think that was one instance where I didn't let fear control what I had intended to do. And I'm really glad that I did go back and experience. Not all of my experiences were super great. And I wrote about that in my memoir, but I felt like it wasn't super great, but it was necessary.
Yeah.
And I needed that because again, that's part of my healing journey.
Yeah. So fear as a safety net is fear is keeping us locked in rather than moving on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's something that we're used to. It's like even if it's not the best thing for us, we're used to it. So I'm going to stay right here. And then I think that's where we kind of get stuck.
Yeah. Yeah. I was absolutely terrified of rejection, and that stopped me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I wasn't aware that I was terrified of rejection, and then I became aware in a split second that I was absolutely terrified of her rejecting me again. And then as on straight away on the back of that terror came an overriding feeling, I'm not going to let this fear stop me. And it was actually a very violent, like an anger. So
That's how it manifested.
that's how it came up. It's about 7 or 8 years ago. I'm getting slightly goosebumps now, because I don't take, I'm not taking the credit for saying, right, I saw my fear and I realized I had to rise above it. It wasn't like that at all.
Right.
It came with like a sucker punch, right? It was like a 2-punch thing, right? So it was very violent, absolute fear, terror of rejection, and then some kind of force bigger than that coming in, very violent, almost like fighting violence with violence.
Yeah.
It was pretty weird. It was pretty weird, and it was very extreme, and I can't remember another experience anything like that in the 56 years, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, very, very violent. You talked about, before we start talking today, you talked about the extremes of the emotional roller coaster
Yeah.
since reunion. But just stepping back a bit, you also talked about us being driven to connect, like across, in well, in many different ways,
Yeah.
not just the connection with the
I
birth
feel like that's a normal human desire, is to connect. So we're connecting with family, be it biological or adoptive. We're connecting with friends, coworkers. We're connecting with our communities, with for some of us a higher power. So we're making those connections in our lives, and as adoptees, we desperately want to connect with biological family. And I think that in that quest, sometimes our journeys, we don't take into account maybe how we got to the point of relinquishment. Because at relinquishment, that connection with our birth families is broken. And we just long, like there's a deep longing to get that back. But yet we don't always consider what happened at the beginning of that connection. So either our mother or father, or our mother alone, either they decided or someone else decided for them that our connection is going to be broken. And so sometimes when we are on this journey and we actually do make a connection with our biological family, we don't always take into account that, okay, we've had some time to process the break in connection, and our biological family members may or may not have had some time to process that, because maybe some of them, just they had to move on quickly because of their family situation. And now all of a sudden we pop back up, and so trying to reestablish that connection can sometimes be super difficult.
Yeah. You talked about expectations in this regard, the expectations in reunion. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What you've learned about expectations?
What I've learned probably the most is it's probably best if we don't go in with preconceived expectations, because we don't know what what's going to happen, what we're going to experience. We don't know if our family is going to be happy that we're now back in on the scene or not. We don't know if we're going to be accepted, received with love or not. And I always kind of grew up with this thought about how a parent-child relationship should be. It's loving, it's caring, it's all of those good things. When in reality, yes, there's those good things, but then there's also things that aren't so great. And that was one thing that maybe I wasn't prepared for prior to reunion is, and I don't even know really what I was prepared for. And so just within the last 5 years since I've been in reunion, I have experienced, it's been such a roller coaster. I've experienced such extreme highs. It's been such a thrilling ride. But then I have gone down and experienced the deepest, darkest valleys that I have ever experienced in my life. And it takes an emotional toll on you. And I think I've just, at this point, I've come to the realization that the parent-child relationship that I've always wanted with my biological parents, it's not ever going to happen. It's just not ever going to happen. And that's okay, because I've been connected with my biological siblings, and those connections have just been absolutely amazing. I would have never even thought that that would have turned out as great as it has turned out. So, that's my silver lining in this. But I just, those expectations that I had for that parent-child relationship, it's not going to happen for me. And I had to accept that. And it took me a long time to get here. It wasn't like, we meet, it's great, then it's not great, it's great, then it's not great. Oh, I don't want that anymore. No, it really took a long time for me to get here. And I think I had to go through another grieving process. My I had a really good relationship with my adoptive family, adoptive parents, and my adoptive dad passed away in 2020 from COVID. And so my husband and I moved my adoptive mom in with us, and she passed away 10 months later. So it was just a very difficult time. And in the process, I was in reunion with my biological parent. And so it was navigating the loss of my adoptive family, navigating this new connection that I'm having with my biological parent, and navigating the loss of my adoptive parents. And then now navigating, in my mind, the loss of my biological parent. And even though that parent's still alive, but I just know that we're not going to have that relationship. So I was in the grieving process of, now I'm parentless again. And it was a very
Yeah.
emotional and difficult thing to process.
Yeah.
But I think I'm still healing from it. It's still pretty raw, but I'm working on it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a terrible thing to happen. I'm sorry that everything was so condensed and so tricky at the time. Yeah. So
Thank you.
I mean, it seems a slightly weird question to ask, but it's occurred to me, so I'm going to ask it anyway. I mean, when you said working on it, I mean, what does that mean to you, working on it?
Yeah. I think working on it, number one, is changing my mindset, changing my perspective. So working on what my expectations are. So that's number one. Number two, I pray a lot. I pray a lot and ask for guidance and ask for acceptance and ask for that peace, that internal peace. And it's difficult to achieve. It really is. But just making changes with the way I communicate, and um, you know, I I'm sure I should start therapy with a professional therapist. That's probably, I'm not there yet. I know I need to do it. But again, I feel like that's part of the healing process, and I'm sure I'll get there. But right now, I'm trying to work through it on my own. And, we'll see how far I get in my healing journey by myself. But, I always tell my kids, it's just like, well, when you're physically sick, when your body's physically ill, you go to a medical doctor. And, when you're having problems with your emotions and, mental capacity, then you should see a therapist. And they're like, yeah, mom, you should see it. Yes, I
Yeah.
should. So, yeah, but I'm working on it.
So what does the higher power look like for you? How's that?
So I tell this story of this family who had husband and wife had two kids, two sons, and military family. They were stationed in Okinawa at the time. The wife had had a couple of miscarriages, and then when the opportunity came for them to adopt a girl from Korea, they uh, jumped on the opportunity. So they had looked through pictures of available children for adoption, and they picked out a child. She had a sibling, and they wanted to keep them together. So she was adopted to another family that would take both. They picked out another child, and when they went to the agency to go meet them, uh, that child was maybe 6 at the time, and she knew who her mother was, and she wanted her mother to come back. She didn't want to be adopted. So now here this couple is at the adoption agency, and so they asked the orphanage if they had another girl who was ready for adoption that could meet with this husband and wife. And the orphanage said yes. Well, that little girl was me. So they picked me to go meet with this family. And what I say is I was not my adoptive parents' first choice. I wasn't even their second choice, but I was God's choice for them. So it's my belief that I was handpicked out of that orphanage and placed with this family because God said, you're not going to have this life here. You're going to go with this family and you're going to live here. You're going to get this education. You're going to marry this man. You guys are going to raise these wonderful human beings and you're going to share this testimony with the world. And so that's how I started because I didn't even know that when I was 2 years old in that orphanage, I had no idea what my life was going to be like there. I had no idea what my life was going to be like anywhere. So it wasn't that I could pray at that point and ask God, oh, please help me. That I'm two. I don't know that, but I feel like He had mercy on me and decided this is going to be a different life for you. And I've just always, and I told my kids throughout life, I'm like, God didn't handpick me out of an orphanage. It's just like either one of my offspring's going to be great or there's work to be done. And so if I can be shown grace and mercy, then others can also be shown grace and mercy. And that's just what I believe. And I understand that we all don't have the same beliefs, which is great because we don't all want to be the same. How boring would we be if we were all the same?
Yeah.
But that's just for me, that's what I believe.
Yeah. So that's really deep acceptance, right? Or probably not even, and acceptance isn't quite the word for it, is it? Destiny. I don't know what word would you
Yeah,
is acceptance about right, or is that?
well, yes, we all have this predestined um, I don't even know what to say, but I feel like, we all have a purpose here on earth, right? And whether we live in our purpose or not, we've been given free will from God. So we can choose to live in our purpose or we can choose not to, just like people are given gifts and talents, and some people choose to use their gifts and talents, and some people don't. So it's that's part of our free will. So when we talk about living in our purpose, walking in our purpose, Simon, I feel like you are living in your purpose. You're walking in your purpose. We've experienced the things that we've experienced, and now we're using it to help others. So the experiences that you've had as an adoptee, you're sharing that with others to kind of help others along their journey as well. And that's that's fantastic. And I applaud you for for doing that work. And I know sometimes for me, I'm such a private person, and it is really difficult when you release your story to the public, then you're opening yourself up for scrutiny, for judgment, for all kinds of things, right? But if you keep it all private, then nobody has to know and nobody has to judge you. But it's it's bigger than us. And so I can't keep quiet about how God has blessed me in my life, because I don't know who my story is going to inspire, who my story is going to encourage, who is going to benefit from hearing the experiences and the insight that I've gained from my journey. I don't know who. And so that's why I share it whenever I have the opportunity, because that's what I want to do. I want, the love of Jesus, that light. I want to carry that light out into the world, to be that beacon of hope, to be that encouragement, because we really need it. There's um, so many people who, been dealing with rejection and dealing with that broken connection, experience depression and despair, and, could potentially be suicidal. And a lot of them, they succeed at that stuff. And so they need some sort of light to come in and say, hey, you know what? Here's a way. Here's a way. Here's hope. Here's something that can diminish despair. And so,
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. And the response is great, right? I've had a look at some of your, had a look at Amazon, and you like 5 stars. It's like,
yeah,
it's
thank
great.
you.
It's great. So
Thank you.
definitely working, and yeah, we're just trying to. I heard this expressed by a mentor of mine, and she's actually the reason I do the podcast. Actually, so a shout out to Sammy Blindell. I don't know whether she listens to this. She was actually adopted by her stepfather. They did it when she was 2. She says our mess becomes our message.
Mm, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I've heard a funny way, a less a less polite but a funnier way. So the SH1T that we've been through becomes the manure to help others grow. That's
Right.
the idea.
Yeah.
And another guy talks about our message becoming bigger than our fear.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what, so as a private person doing something that is clearly very unprivate, publishing a memoir.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
even speaking, even public speaking, it's I'm a behind the scenes kind of person. I will do whatever you need me to do behind the scenes. We're gonna, make this whatever event or program or whatever happen behind the scenes. I'm great. But now it's like put me on a stage and like what? And so I've had to, overcome that fear of public speaking as well. And that is completely outside of my comfort zone. But again, this testimony that I have, this message, is greater than me. And I do, thank God for my testimony. I thank him for using me in the ways that he has used me. I never, if you would have asked me when I was 18 years old, if I'd be sitting here with you today talking about this, I would have never in a million years believed that I would, because that just never. So there's been multiple things that I've done in my life that never in a million years, if you would have told me that,
Yeah.
I'd have been like, nope, I'm not going to do that. Or, nope,
Yeah.
that's not going to happen. So it's been an amazing ride, an amazing journey. I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot about myself. Writing my memoir really taught me a lot about myself. Uh, I realized how difficult it is for me to sit in one spot for hours and hours and hours at a time over a 2.5 year period. And because again, that's not me, because from the time my feet hit the ground in the morning to the time my head hits the pillow at night, I'm just like, go, 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 constantly doing this, doing that, doing that. But for me to have to sit here still in my thought, in my emotion, in my, ooh, that was hard. That was more than hard. And just learning how to describe what it is I'm feeling and put that on paper so that when someone reads it, they can feel that. Again, that's hard. That's super hard. It's like you talk about painting a picture with your words. And what were you feeling at that moment? I don't know. I was just in the moment. I was just feeling it. Well, what was that? Explain that. That is so difficult. That's so difficult. But I'm glad I went through the process. I learned a lot from it. And I just pray that it inspires someone, that it helps someone along the way.
Yeah. I was looking at a web page, looking at your website again before we spoke. I was looking at another website, and it was an anonymous blog post from from an adopter here in the UK, and she talks about being unable to write her feelings down.
Yeah, it's incredibly hard. And there are times, there's a chapter in my memoir called The Call. And writing that chapter was one of the most difficult chapters of all, because that is the chapter where I recount the very first conversation I have with my biological half brother. And this is the first biological relative that I'm talking to, minus my daughters, right?
Yeah.
And that, just reliving those moments and the emotion that was tied to that call was incredibly difficult. It took me a good 2 weeks at least just to get the draft down, because I had to keep stopping and regroup, pull myself together, and then keep going. It was incredibly difficult, because again, and there was one other, it was after an exchange that I had with my biological parent, and I probably took a 4 month break after that, honestly, in writing, because I did not want to write out of anger. I wanted to write in truth. So I had to take a break, I had to reel it in, and then I could go back and say, okay, this is what happened. And there are times where I don't necessarily delve into what I was thinking, how I was feeling. I kind of write what happened, in a story form, but I write what happened and I just let the reader absorb it. That was very intentional. If you read some parts and it's just like, she didn't say how that made her feel. You're right. I did not say how that made me feel. And again, I wanted to write in truth, and sometimes it is incredibly difficult to share those innermost thoughts. And sometimes I don't think it's necessary to. It, we don't have to publicly share everything. And, in this society where people want to know, people share, sometimes I feel like, yes, sometimes we overshare
Yeah.
and we don't necessarily need to. So, but it can be incredibly difficult to go inside and pull it out.
So there's something just popping into my head in terms of the people that we have, the other adoptees that we have on this show. Most of them have written books, or they are therapists, right? And there's a reason for that. The reason for that is, if they've written a book like you have, or if they're a therapist, they're out in the world and they're easier to find. They're easier to find.
Right.
So the fact, listeners, that I think I want to draw attention to this, because it means that they've gone down some of the journey, right? So this woman who was writing a blog saying that she no, she wasn't writing a blog, she was being interviewed. She's being interviewed, and she said, I had to, yeah, she said, I couldn't write my experience down. So the people that we have on the show, listeners, most of them have written it down, or have processed it through by the nature of the fact that they're now therapists. So I haven't done that. So if you're looking to move on, what Lisa's talking about here, what Lee's talking about here, is quite I don't know, is it a therapeutic process, writing it down? Would you describe it as, how would you describe it?
A lot of times it is for a lot of people. And I think that's something that is recommended by professionals is, write down what it is you're feeling, because then it's a release. You're not keeping it bottled up inside. It's not eating at you from the inside out. If you can put it on paper, it is very,
Yeah.
cleansing.
Yeah. And sorry to interrupt. And you can put it all down, and worry about what, you can just write it for yourself.
Exactly.
People do this, and you can write it for yourself, and then you can go through, at some point, if you decide that you want to publish it, you can go through and take out the stuff that you don't want out in the public domain, right? But as Lisa, what you're saying is get it all out.
Right.
And yeah,
And I feel like that's a great avenue to assist in the healing process, if that's where you are in your life. And, just write down all of those thoughts, feelings, whether it's anger, whether it's fear, whether it's sadness, whether it's joy, whether whatever that emotion is, if you just write it down, it may or may not formulate into a story, but it will help you try to internally process what's happening.
Yeah. And you don't need to do this on your own. Did you do this? Did you have some help, or did you do it in community, or did you do it on your own? How did you do it?
Well, when I decided that I wanted to write a book, I took a class. It was just like a 1 or 2 session class at a community college on how to write a book. And in this class, one of the two facilitators, they go around and ask people, well, what are you going to write your book about, right? So during the break, she came up to me and told me that she had adopted two children from Korea.
Wow.
And she was very interested in my story. And she happened to be an editor. So she told me that if I needed any kind of assistance along the way, to reach out to her and she would help me. And she was a tremendous, tremendous, wealth of information, right? She had helped people publish books. She had written some of her own. So she introduced me to my editor, introduced me to my proofreader. She introduced me to a writers group that it was a bunch of writers and they submitted portions of their work, and all the other writers in the group would critique it. So they really helped me formulate my story for a wider audience. And so so I did a lot of it myself. So yeah, the story is mine. The editor was more just for, kind of like, does this make sense? Grammatical stuff. So she didn't really change a lot, which I was surprised. And then with the setting, the typesetting, uh, again, she's like, well, here's some templates that you can use. Here's some resources if you're going to format it yourself. And told me about Amazon publishing, so I self-published. So yes, I had people who were experts in book writing and publishing help me along the way to formulate my story. But this I did the heavy lifting for sure.
Yeah.
And, the words are mine, the story is mine. They just kind of said, well, even though it's a memoir, you need to write it like a novel. It needs to sound like a novel. And that's not something that I would have known to do. You need to describe the theme, and that's not something I would have known to do. So just things like that.
Yeah. And I'm just clicking around it because I'm trying to remember a name. It's come to me now. But there is also listeners, if you want to do this and you want a little bit more support, there are adoptee writing groups out there, so you can write in community with other adoptees. Sarah Easterly, Adoptive Voices, she's been on the show. Check her out. I'll put a link into her in the show notes, a link to Sarah's interview here on Thriving Adoptees. So you can find out more about her and decide if she's the sort of person that you'd like to talk to about this writing group. That was an unanticipated turning that we took there. I'm conscious of time. However, I did see this fantastic phrase on your website when I had another look at it yesterday or a couple of days ago, and it said I think it was redemptive resilience.
Yes.
And I thought, well, I kind of know what resilience is, but redemptive resilience sounds like a pretty cool thing, a bit like post-traumatic growth. People say what that's, I don't know what that is, but it sounds good. It sounds a lot better than post-traumatic stress disorder. And Lee's got a massive smile on her face on that, big grin. So yeah, what's redemptive resilience? What's that?
Yes. What that means to me is, a lot of us have experienced traumas that people who are possibly weak or just not as strong as some would just never bounce back from. Like it will pull them down and keep them there. But one thing that I have found in the adoptee community is that not only are we survivors, but we're thrivers. And so that thing in our life, whatever it was, and this is for anybody really, that thing in your life that either should have took you out or could have took you out, didn't. And you bounced back. You were resilient. And now you're experiencing that redemption of, yes, I'm here. I'm still working in this purpose. And even though I should be down and out, I've still got joy that I'm spreading around. And that's that redemptive resilience for me.
Yeah.
It's just like, I'm yep, I might have been down for a while, but I got back up.
Yeah.
And now here I am, working and walking in my purpose, helping others along the way, pulling other people out too from
Yeah.
where they are in those dark places. And that's really what we need to do. Everybody needs help once in a while. We can't always do this on our own. So, just really reaching out to the community and, trying to just give where we can, love where we can, and just, be that support for someone else so that, they can get on the other side of redemption too.
So when I go anywhere near the topic of resilience, I've got my own kind of philosophy on it. And one of the things I'm trying to do a little bit less on the podcast when we're doing interviews is less of my philosophy and more of the guest philosophy on resilience. So where does resilience come from? How does it happen? What's the source of it? How do you see resilience?
Again, it's that mindset, it's that perspective change, because resilience starts from within. You've got to decide. Someone else can't decide for you that you're going to be resilient. You have to decide yourself that okay, I'm going to bounce back. I'm not going to let this keep me here for very long. We all kind of get in our dark places and we all kind of sit there in it for a while. You can't help it. You do. You just sit there but it's that perspective of, okay, that was a sucker punch that I didn't see coming. Yep, that knocked the wind out of me. Yep, I'm down, I'm flat on my back down on the ground. But it's that desire to kind of keep going, to strive, to get to the point where you're thriving, to not let life's circumstances be so heavy, because that's one thing that you cannot control what happens to you. You absolutely can't control it. Things happen to us all day, every day. We can't control it. The only thing we can control is how we react to what happens to us. So, with how we react to experiences and things that happen, that's where that resilience comes from. If you decide that, well, okay, I'm just gonna sit here, you can do that. But to move forward, to heal, to bounce back, to help others, that's where that resilience comes in. And I think it starts within, from that perspective shift.
The shift from something to resilience, or what's
The shift from okay, this happened to me, to but I'm not going to let that define me, and to continue to control my life moving forward. That's the perspective shift. Because it's like, if I'm here in this dark place, it's just like I'm always in a dark place. Well, maybe it's because that's where your perspective is. your perspective is in that dark place. So I think internally, we have got to decide that, okay, I can make my situation better. It's because it's, in my mind, it's not how you start, it's how you finish. You can start slow and you can finish strong. But it's that drive, that perspective that's going to get you there. Resilience is, even though, you know, you've been dealt a bad hand, even though things are not great, it's, you keep pushing forward anyway, in spite of. You keep moving forward.
Yeah. Brilliant. So it's an inside job, right?
It is, in my opinion. That's where it starts.
That's where it starts. Yeah. We don't hear a lot about that, do we?
No. But like, Simon, you can't tell me to be resilient. You can't make me be resilient. Like, there's nothing that you can do or say that's going to make me be resilient if I don't already think that, yes, I can. I will. Like, I've got to do the work to make it happen. You can't bounce back for me, right? So that's why it's an internal thing, and you know, you might need help to get there, but you know, part of it is recognizing it, like, oh my God, yes, I can, but how do I do that? I need help. So yeah,
Yeah, I think recognizing it.
yeah.
So it is it's an inside job. It's something we see for ourselves. That's what you're saying. So something that we recognize for ourselves.
It's something that we want. We're gonna have to want to do it. We definitely have to have the will to do it. Recognize it, have the will to do it, and then seek out how, you know, if you need help, seek out how to actually go about doing it.
How does this stack up with your higher power? With your how do you see resilience? What's the relationship between resilience and the higher power?
Hmm. So a lot of times when we are down and at our deepest, darkest moments, and we can't control the things that are happening around us, and we, you know, that's when despair kind of kicks in. And I think, you know, if you go back to scripture and you go back to scripture that says, you know, with God, all things are possible. You know, when you go back to scripture that says, you know, God is a friend to the friendless. So like, he's always with us. He's omnipresent, right? He knows what's happening. And with God as our father, you know, we need to, you know, just, you know, ask for what we want. So, you know, kind of like parents and kids, you know, it's just like, yes, we love our kids, and you know, sometimes when they ask us for stuff, like, oh, you want, oh yeah, sure, you know, or sometimes when they ask us for stuff, no, no, because that's not in our best interest, right? And that's, you know, how it is with you know, my God, is sometimes you ask for stuff, yes, sometimes you ask for stuff and he knows big picture that's not in your best interest. So yeah, sometimes God tells us no. We don't understand why all the time. And you know, and it's like that um, that poem, the footprints poem, where the writer says, you know, there's two sets of footprints in the sand, but then when I go through my hard times, there's just one set of footprints in the sand. Well, God, you left me at that time. And God said, no, that's when I was carrying you. So there's only one set of footprints because I'm holding you in my arms and I'm now doing. And that's, you know, where when we're in those dark times and we go to God and we say, you know, I can't do this on my own. I don't have any control over this outcome because there's nothing I can do or say that's going to change it. But God, you can change it. And that's where, in my relationship with my God, that's how that works for me.
Brilliant. Is there something that you'd like to share that I've not asked you about, Lee?
I think we have covered a lot. I thank you for the work that you're doing in the community to help adoptees thrive. And I just would love to be a resource for anybody who, wants to talk about their journey, needs help with writing their stories, or if I can be a resource to anyone in any way, I'm happy to do that.
That's lovely. That's lovely. And as always, listeners, there's links to Lee's socials and our website in the show notes. So thank you very much. And one last question. What would you like to call this episode of the podcast? Have you got an idea?
Redemptive resilience?
Yeah. Funnily enough, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, let's do that.
Brilliant. We'll do that then. Thank you, listeners, and we'll speak to you again very soon. See you soon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Bye-bye.